Welcome back to the daily Rambam Shir. We are in chapter 10 of the laws of Tumas Eichlin, of impurity that is associated with food. But before we get there, it's Thursday. Let's see where we're up to in the Rambam. We are in the 10th volume of the Rambam Sefer Torah, which has 8 topics, 144 chapters, the largest volume in the whole of the Rambam. The 8 subjects are Tumas Meis, purity of the dead, Paraduma, the red heifer, Tzaras, Mishkav Moishav, other sources of impurity, Sharabis and Tumas, other sources of impurity, foods, vessels, and finally Mikvais. And we are currently learning the laws of impurity that is imparted through foods. There are a total of 16 chapters in that. The first 4 chapters spoke about food that contracts impurity. Then after that, we spoke about how different foods are combined. And most recently, we're talking about liquids that make foods susceptible to impurity. That we started learning about yesterday, and we continue learning about that now. So here we are, except wrong tab. Let's try this again. Okay. We already explained that there are only 7 liquids that contract impurity and make food susceptible to impurity. Remember what they are? They are water, dew, oil, wine, milk, blood, and bee honey. Other liquids are referred to as fruit juices, and they neither contract impurity nor do they make foods susceptible to impurity. The derivatives of the 7 liquids that we mentioned are governed by the same laws as they are. So whether you had milk, or you had the whey that comes from the milk, whether you had wine, or any of these 7 liquids, any derivatives would have the same law. So what are the derivatives? So the derivatives of water are fluids secreted by the ear, the nose, the eye, the mouth, human urine, whether from adults or children. Anything excreted by a man is considered as a liquid, whether it was excreted consciously or unconsciously. Urine of animals and salt that was liquefied are considered as fruit juices. So the urine of people is considered one of the 7 liquids. It's considered water, but if it's from an animal, it's not. They neither contract impurity nor make substances susceptible to impurity, and the same would be with salt that was turned into a liquid. Blood, we're going to category number 2. The blood that is counted as a liquid is the blood that flows from a kosher domesticated or undomesticated animal, meaning whether it's a farm animal or a wild animal, like whether it is a cow or it's a deer, or chicken at the end of its slaughter. Blood that flows at the beginning of the slaughter, by contrast, does not make food susceptible to ritual impurity because the animal is still alive. It resembles the blood of a wound or blood that is let. When a person slaughters an animal and its blood sputters onto food, but that blood is cleaned between the slitting of one side of the animal and the other. So this blood, we said, is not yet blood that would make an item susceptible to impurity. There's a doubt concerning the matter. Therefore, the ruling is held in abeyance. The food is neither eaten nor is it burnt. So we're talking about now which bloods make susceptible to impurity, and we're saying it's not the initial blood, it's only the blood that comes afterwards. A derivative of blood is blood let by a human being that was released with the intent of it being drunk. If, however, it was released as a medical treatment, it is pure and does not make food susceptible to impurity. Similarly, the blood released during the slaughter of non-kosher, domesticated or undomesticated animals or fowl, that's considered as what? It's considered like a drink. It's like fruit juice. It's not susceptible to impurity. The blood that is released with mucus or with feces, or the blood of boils, blisters, blood concentrated in flesh, all neither contract impurity nor make substances susceptible to impurity. Instead, they are like other fruit juices. The blood of crawling animals is like its flesh. It imparts impurity but does not make food susceptible to impurity. There are no entities similar to this. It's a unique phenomena where it's able to impart impurity, because we don't view it as a blood, we view it as part of the animal, but it doesn't make susceptible to impurity because it's not considered one of the 7 liquids. Whey is considered like milk. Human milk that is not needed is not placed in the halacha category of a liquid. So that means if a woman was to just what do they call it? Pump or whatever it is, not for the liquids, not for the milk to be used, but purely just to release the pain that she has not being able to feed. So that would not contract impurity. It does not make food susceptible to impurity, nor does it contract impurity. Therefore, milk excreted by a male, if that were to happen, some kind of maybe hormonal misbalance, is not placed in the halachic category of a liquid. This also applies to the milk of a domesticated or undomesticated animal that was released without human intent. For example, it flowed out from the animal's teeth spontaneously, or it was milked without intent. The milk of a woman, whether it was released intentionally or unintentionally, is generally placed in the halachic category of a liquid. So I actually stand to be corrected what I said a moment ago. Since a woman's milk by default is there to be drinking by the baby, therefore it is considered milk and does make food susceptible to impurity, as opposed to if it was an animal's milk that was not milked with the intention of it being drunken. It makes food susceptible to impurity, and it can contract impurity because it is fit to be drunk by an infant. So that's a mother's milk. Liquids released by those impure people whose impurity causes these liquids to be considered as a primary source of impurity, both impart impurity, they impart impurity, even though the foods had not been made susceptible to ritual impurity beforehand. Why not? Both happen at the same time. The food's susceptibility to impurity and that impurity comes simultaneously, meaning the same liquid both makes the food able to receive impurity and makes the food actually impure. They are the secretion of a zav, you see him in his urine, a reverse of blood from a human corpse, and the blood of an niddah. So all of these, we said, are sources of impurity. So in addition to them being sources of impurity, they are also considered liquids to make the person susceptible to impurity. Similarly, the blood of the wound of a zav and others like him, the milk of such a woman, their tears and the other derivatives of water that they release impart impurity like impure liquids, which impart impurity without any specific intent, because it's coming from a person that is a source of impurity. For impure liquids impart impurity when they are brought into contact with food intentionally, or when they come into contact unintentionally. Accordingly, if milk drips from the breast of an niddah or a zava into the inner space of an oven, the oven and all its contents contract impurity. Obviously, this is again even halacha that may have never happened and maybe will never happen, but we learned it as part of Hashem's wisdom. What's going on, David?
No, my neck is sore.
Okay, I thought you were in fierce disagreement.
No.
Okay, good. I'm safe. Halacha number 6. We have already explained that the liquids released by a person who immersed that day do not impart impurity if he's already gone to mikveh. Even if they fall on a loaf of bread that is truma, it does not become susceptible to impurity unless they fall on it intentionally. As is law regarding other pure liquids, which do not make food susceptible to impurity unless they fall intentionally. Sweat, pus, vomit, feces, the liquids released by a fetus born in the 8th month, which we said is not going to live. The diarrhea of a person who drank the waters of the hot springs of Tiberia, or the like, even if it is clear, all are not placed in the halachic category of liquids. They do not contract impurity, nor do they make food susceptible to impurity. Again, this is obviously all talking about a person that was pure, but just had these liquids coming from him, as opposed to if it was a person that was a source of impurity, then these liquids would be the same as him. So what have we spoken about so far? We have spoken about water and milk and blood. When a person drinks other liquids and releases them, they are considered liquids as they were previously. For other liquids do not regain purity in a person's body. How does that work? If a person drank impure water and then regurgitated it, he threw it up, it is still impure. It did not become purified when released. If I drank impure water, went to mikveh and then regurgitated it, or it became loathsome and then you regurgitated it, meaning it was already sitting in the system for a while, or it was released as urine, even if he hadn't gone to mikveh himself, it is pure. Once the liquids have already gone through his system, then they no longer are considered water.
Keep well.
Okay. If I drank other impure liquids or ate other impure foods, even though he immersed and then regurgitated them, they are still impure. So this was specifically regarding water. They do not become purified in a person's body. If they became loathsome or released as urine, as feces, then they are pure. So we said, okay, this is the point. The point was going to mikveh. We said if a person swallowed some water, took a dip, went into mikveh, came back out, and then he spat up the water. So we said that water becomes pure through him going to mikveh. But if it was any other impure liquids, then the fact that he went to mikveh in the interim would be of no consequence. Only water that is dipped in a mikveh becomes pure, but other liquids that are dipped in a mikveh, if they're impure liquids and then you get it back out, it remains impure. We discussed that elsewhere. We already explained that sweat is not placed in the halachic category of liquids. Even if a person drank impure liquids, so the liquid he drank was impure and excreted them by sweating, his sweat is pure. If, however, a person baths in drawn water, which we said is impure, makes him impure by rabbinic law, and then sweated, his sweat is impure. I think it's because it's part of the rabbinic decree to prevent people from going to baths instead of going to mikveh. If he dried himself from the water and then sweated, then his sweat is pure. Because originally it's kind of, he's wet, you're not going to know what it's from. So then it would be like a person who went into a bath, which we said would become impure to prevent people from going to bath instead of going to mikveh. Moisture that collects on the walls of homes, particularly in bathrooms, particularly in the winter, if you want to keep the windows shut. Trenches, caves, and cisterns. All moisture that collects on these walls is not placed in the halachic category of liquids. Even if the house is impure, the moisture that collects is pure. The moisture that collects in a bathhouse, by contrast, I stand to be corrected again, he gave many categories, but not the bathroom. If it was a bathhouse, it's considered as water because then there's direct steam. If water in the bathhouse was impure, the moisture that collects there is also impure. If I brought produce into such a house and moisture collects upon it, it becomes susceptible to impurity. If he brings containers there and moisture collects upon them, the moisture is considered as separated intentionally, and it makes food susceptible to impurity. So in short, the moisture in the house is not considered like water, but the moisture in the bathhouse, which is because there's a lot of steam, is considered like water. That makes things susceptible to impurity. When there's a pool in a house, indoor heated pool, or not heated, and moisture collects on the walls of the house because of it, so probably is heated. If the pool contains impure water, then all the moisture that collects in the house because of it is impure. So basically, if you have a body of water within that space, then the moisture that accumulates has the same status as that body of water. If there's no body of water there, then it's pure. When there are two pools in a house, one containing impure water and one containing pure water, if moisture collects close to the impure pool, it is impure. If it collects close to the pure one, it is pure. If it is equidistant from the two of them, then it is impure, out of doubt. Okay. Halacha number 13. So we spoke about water, we spoke about milk, we spoke about blood. What about oil? So the black liquid that flows from olives without them being pressed is considered like oil. So in order for it to be considered as oil, it doesn't need to be pressed intentionally. As long as it comes from the olive and it's black liquid, it is considered oil and causes things to be susceptible to impurity. I see we have a question over here. Yes, correct. We've discussed this before. The Rambam, and on principle, deals with each particular topic in its context. So even if something is forbidden, that's in one context, when he'll still bring it up in another context, because it's just because somebody did something wrong, it doesn't mean that they can't go ahead and do something right. Like the famous story of Yosel the Ganef. One day I'll tell you about Yosel the Ganef. If I have a super short Rambam and we're done early, then remind me to tell you the story of Yosel the Ganef. Very, very special. Very, very special.
What's the name?
Yosel the Ganef.
Yosel the Ganef. Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was a very, very special Jew. Very special. Anyhow, back to the Rambam. The black liquid that flows from olives without the big press is considered like oil, as we just mentioned. The liquid that drips from the baskets of oil and grapes when they are harvested is not placed in the halachic category of liquids. So basically, we're not talking about the baskets of pressed olives or grapes, because that would for sure be wine or oil. We're talking about when the grapes were still whole, the olives were still whole, and some liquid was coming out, so that's not considered as oil or wine. Does not contract impurity, nor does it make food susceptible to impurity unless it collected in a container. Halacha number 14, when a person weighs grapes in a weighing pan, the wine left in the weighing pan is not placed in the halachic category of liquids unless it is poured into a container. It resembles the liquid that drips from the baskets of olives and grapes mentioned in the previous halacha. When a person pushes grapes on a truma into a jug, even though the wine flows over his hands, everything is pure. He hasn't yet crushed the grapes, but he's just pushing them in to a jug to be ready to do something with it. So therefore, the wine that flows is not yet considered wine and does not make it susceptible to impurity. The liquids that flow in the butchering area in the temple courtyards or the kitchen, i.e. the blood of the sacrificial animals and the water used to clean them, are always considered as pure. We assume that the animal was shechted properly. And they do not contract impurity, nor do they make food susceptible to ritual impurity. This matter is a halacha conveyed by the oral tradition, because otherwise, after all, it is blood. It should still, or the water at least, you would say, should make things susceptible to impurity. But it's a halacha l'moshe b'sidai, passed down by oral tradition. Therefore, all the blood of the sacrificial animals is not susceptible to ritual impurity, nor does it make food susceptible to ritual impurity. Since the blood of the sacrificial animals does not make food susceptible to ritual impurity, the sacrificial animals that were slaughtered in the temple courtyard were not made susceptible to ritual impurity through the blood of their slaughter. The meat of these sacrificial animals does not become susceptible to ritual impurity unless liquids other than those of the butchering area of the temple come in contact with them. So just to explain this in other terms, if a person, nowadays, the sheikh shechts a cow, so the cow is considered susceptible to impurity because the blood of the shchita makes the cow susceptible to impurity and therefore would be able to become pure. But if it wasn't a regular cow and a regular for dinner, but it was rather a korban and offering in the temple, so there we have a tradition passed down from Moshe Mount Sinai that blood would not make the animal susceptible to impurity. It would need a separate source of liquid to make it susceptible to impurity. Finally, halacha number 17, when a cow that was consecrated as a sacrificial animal was made to cross a river and was then slaughtered while it still had tangible moisture on it, it has become susceptible to impurity. Not from the blood, as we said, blood of a sacrifice does not make it impure, but rather from the water on its feet. Therefore, if an impure pin was found in its flesh, the meat is impure because it's susceptible to impurity. Similarly, if the cow's mouth was sealed closed outside of Yerushalayim, even though the status of the pin found in its meat is unknown, obviously when he says sealed closed, he doesn't mean, obviously the cow was still able to breathe, but it means that he wasn't able to drink. So they already closed his mouth outside of Jerusalem. Even though the status of the pin found in its meat is unknown, the meat is impure. Why? The rationale is that it touched implements outside of Jerusalem. If the pin was found in its waist, the meat is pure. In either instance, the hands of the people involved in cutting up the animal are pure because the decree involving the impurity of hands that's again a rabbinic decree and it does not apply in the temple as we explained. In which context does the above apply? For the meat to be considered impure according to scriptural law. To incur impurity of rabbinic origin, by contrast, consecrated food does not require exposure to liquids to make it susceptible to ritual impurity. Instead, the cherished nature of consecrated food itself makes the meat susceptible to impurity. If any impurity, whether minor or severe, touches it, it becomes disqualified, even though it was not exposed to liquids, as we explained. So in summary, the last discussion was about if an animal becomes susceptible to impurity after it has been shechted. And we've said that biblically speaking, a korban, an offering, would not, but by rabbinic law it does. And if it's not an offering, then it does become susceptible to impurity from its blood. Even if it is an offering, if it had water on it from a river that it crossed, it would be susceptible to impurity. So yeah, we spoke a little bit about water, about oil, a little bit about wine, a little bit about milk, a little bit about blood. We didn't speak about honey or dew. Maybe there'll be more discussion on that further. Maybe not. And now for questions. I would like to congratulate you all for